Hi knitting friends, Shaina Bilow here. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to measure your gauge in knitting. Here I've got a stockinette swatch because my pattern called for stockinette stitch, and I'm going to show you what a stitch looks like as well as how to measure your gauge. So a stitch in knitting looks like a little letter V, as in violet. Okay, that's a stitch in knitting. That's a stitch. If you like seeing it drawn out, as I like drawing, here I've colored in one pink stitch out of this sea of 16 stitches. So here you'll notice the pink stitch faces down like a little V, and it has neighboring stitches and neighboring rows that all look like little letter V's. Of course, this is if we're measuring in stockinette stitch. Stitches look a little bit different on the back of the work in stockinette, or if you are doing other stitch patterns and things like that. Today we'll be focusing on stockinette. All right, so we know what our stitch looks like. Our next step is to grab some locking stitch markers and our tape measure or our gauge measurer. There are a lot of fancy tools out there in the knitting world for measuring gauge. So we've got this type of thing here from Skacel that has knitting needle gauges as well as a 2-inch span or 5-centimeter span that you can measure inside of. There's also the Susan Bates Knit Check, same concept, 2-inch by 2-inch, and then all the needle gauges. And then other companies make formal 10-centimeter by 4-inch or 4 by 4, 10 by 10 measuring tools as well. And then there's also a trusty measuring tape. I prefer to use the measuring tape, but use whatever makes you happy. Okay? Alrighty, let's get down to business and measure this gauge swatch. The first step is going to be to find one stitch towards one edge of the swatch. So I'm just going to go with this stitch here and place a marker between that stitch and its neighboring stitch. So I've got a V here, a full stitch here, and a full stitch here, and my stitch marker is sitting between those two stitches. I'm then going to take my tape measure and lay it out. I like to put the 10-inch mark right here. Depends on your measuring tape. If your measuring tape starts at the 0 and doesn't have this extra inch here, I would recommend putting your measuring tape right here at the 10 and holding it in place. If you have nothing to hold in place, the tape can kind of scooch around, or the ruler, what have you. All right, so here we go. I've got that. And now I'm laying this out, and I'm going to count across. I'm going to look at the 4-inch mark and see if I'm right between two stitches, and I am. This 4-inch mark is between these two stitches here. So I'm going to place a marker right between those two stitches. So that tells me I have a 4-inch span between these two sets of stitches. You can also do this with a 5-inch span or a 3-inch span. Your goal is to find a full stitch. If you cannot get a full stitch and that tape measure lands on a half stitch, that's okay too. You can measure by a half stitch if you wanted to. It's just easier to start off if you're measuring full stitches. All right, so I know that this here, from orange marker to orange marker, is 4 inches wide. I am now going to count the number of stitches between my two markers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I have 18 stitches equals 4 inches. Okay, so that's my gauge right there. What does this all mean? This means if I go by the ratio here, or if I go down to 1 inch, if I turn this into 1 inch, this is 4.5 stitches equals 1 inch. So for every 4 inches, I have 18 stitches, which means in every 1 inch, I have 4.5 stitches, because 4.5 times 4 equals 18. Let's say my gauge swatch was 6 inches wide, right? So if this is 6 inches, then that is going to be 27 stitches equals 6 inches. So it's all relative. What this represents, gauge, is the number of stitches you have in every inch. And that should maintain its consistency across a row. So depending on what your pattern is calling for, maybe they'd like you to do a 5-inch gauge swatch or a 10-inch gauge swatch or a 2-inch gauge swatch. Everything can be expanded and contracted. But that's how you measure the swatch. And now for rows, we're going to turn the work on its side and do the same thing. So I'm going to place my marker just below a stitch right here. So it's just below a stitch. Then I'm going to lay out the tape measure. And now here I've run out of space. I didn't knit a very large swatch here. So do as I say, not as I do. Make sure you have nice large swatches. Okay, so I'm going to go to the 3-inch point. And I'm following this row straight up. And I'm going to put my marker in here at the 3-inch point. So now here within this 3-inch segment, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 rows. So those are upright stitches creating a row. So 18 rows equals 3 inches. Therefore, in 1 inch, so 18 divided by 3, I have 6 rows. Or if I wanted to find out what my gauge is within 4 inches, I would have 24 rows. Because 4 times 6 is 24. 4 inches times 6. So in every 1 inch, I have 6 rows. And then that can be expanded to fit whatever number of inches you need. In 10 inches, you'd have 60 rows. 100 inches, you'd have 600 rows, etc. So gauge can expand numerically to fit the measurements you need, but it is a fixed number based on your gauge swatch. Happy knitting!